Today I want to talk about wealth transfer. We subtitled it Leaving a Legacy. And the first thing that comes to mind is that you need to have something to leave. And of course, that's what wealth management is all about. There's a variety of different objectives we need to uncover. So often when I begin to talk to people about wealth transfer, we engage them in the conversation of, do you have a specific objective to either create or to preserve some of your estate for your heirs? And then we get their feedback. Based on the answers to their questions, we will then begin to unpack this whole issue of, what does my objective look like? What do I want to do? And then we'll dive deeper and deeper into it, uncovering more of their thoughts and feelings towards what would they like to accomplish with this. Each person or each family may have a completely different objective. And I have heard, I would assume in jest, that some people would like to spend their last few dollars paying for their funeral. And I've met lots of people who want to give to their favorite charity. But I would say that the overwhelming answers are that they want to be able to support their family in some of the things that might be near and dear to their hearts as an extended family through the wealth transfer, and that we want to make this as efficient as possible. Through this process, we also reflect on our own personal objectives. We have 4 grown children, we have 3 grandchildren, and so the possibilities are endless. So let's dive into the agenda. We want to look at the state of wealth transfer in Canada, a lot of misnomers about taxation, and we'll cover some of those things, some of the concerns and barriers. One of the new realities is blended families. How in the world do I make this fair and equitable? And we're also going to look at 6 steps for frictionless wealth transfer. A lot of people have concerns about what happens after I'm gone. Will this work out well? Will it accomplish the objective that I was hoping for? And so we're going to cover some of those topics. First of all, let's dive into the state of wealth transfer in Canada. We are currently at the start of, or a little bit into, some of the single biggest intergenerational wealth transfer in Canadian history. I would imagine that if any of your predecessors emigrated to Canada, that they started out with very little, and that there has been a lot of wealth created in Canada in the last several generations. It is estimated that $1 trillion in Canadian dollars will be passed between generations in this decade, between 2016 and 2026. That is a significant amount of money. We were curious about wealth transfer in Canada, so we hired Environics Research to do a poll and found out a few surprising things. First of all, it turns out that many families are not having any of these conversations. Sometimes parents or grandparents were raised in a time of privacy, and it's not necessarily that you need to share the numbers of what you're dealing with, but just the concepts. So what this poll showed is that 58% have not discussed any instructions for their estate with their heirs. They have absolutely no idea what they're going to be responsible for or how this is going to take place. More than 1 in 10 of these people don't plan to have a discussion at all, which is actually pretty scary. When we don't have these discussions, we miss the opportunity to ensure our heirs understand our estate decisions, which in turn supports long-term family harmony. There's nothing worse than people trying to figure out after the fact what somebody intended to do. I am encouraged that 46% say they plan to have a discussion at some point in time, and I'm hoping that most of you are in that 46% and are here looking for help to get started. We've identified a number of opportunities for effective wealth transfer and 6 steps that can help families like yours make sure that the wealth transfer goes smoothly and happens in the way that you want it to. We've all heard of circumstances, and hopefully it's not your family, where there's a lot of confusion, anxiety, maybe even tension between family members when it was not clear to them ahead of time what their relative intended to do. And that's when the guesswork begins, and that's where the potential for conflict begins. And the last thing we want to do is have conflict over money in a family. We want to do everything possible to avoid that if we can. So we take proactive steps in not only having all the proper documentation like we talked with Tony Grassi about in a previous webcast, but also to make sure that it's updated and to make sure that the people who are responsible for it are clear on our objective. They don't need to know what the sum of money is, how much or how little it is. That's irrelevant. They just need to know what the process is so that everyone is clear. What are some of the concerns and barriers? This is where it gets real. And these are real people that we're dealing with, and it involves emotions, because emotions are often close to our money. And so we want to take as many proactive steps and think about all the potential pitfalls and potential solutions ahead of time so that we can avoid as much of this as possible. So concerns and barriers. 32% worry about how their heirs will handle their inheritance, and this is an enormous issue. There are a lot of wealthy Canadians that are afraid of what happens when someone inherits their wealth. Almost 1/3 worry about how they will manage the inheritance. Almost as many don't really trust their children's spouses to do a good job with it. Obviously, apologies to any spouses in the room. I happen to be attending this, which explains why 1/5 of Canadians are worried the transfer of their wealth will end with their children. When people are building wealth, generally speaking, their intention is to provide a better life for their heirs, which doesn't just stop with the next generation. It's hopefully intergenerational. And so this objective needs to be kept clearly in the front of their minds so that they know exactly what they want to do to accomplish this goal. Most Canadians do not want to see subsequent heirs inheriting nothing. So these are very common concerns. Let's take a look at what some of the top barriers are to this happening. When the IPC researchers probed deeper on why Canadians were afraid their heirs would not manage their wealth properly, we found 4 significant barriers. Firstly, about 1/4 of families worry that factors beyond anyone's control, such as inflation, cost of living, market changes, could erode the inheritance. Almost as many people think their heirs might not know enough about financial planning and management to maintain the wealth over the long term. Many worried their heirs would go on a spending spree. And a significant number worried about the inheritance being lost in a divorce. We know what the divorce statistics are, and we know what happens when divorces happen. So obviously, these are things that are sitting in the back of the minds of some wealthy Canadians. In fact, we found that families which had discussed wealth transfer were a lot less worried about these barriers than those who hadn't. So let's take a look at how we can work together to get past these fears and overcome these barriers with 6 simple steps. It's quite possible that anyone who is watching this webcast is in a blended, or maybe we'd call it non-traditional family. I'm not really sure exactly how to describe that anymore, because there are so many blended families in Canada now that maybe this is the more normal occurrence. In our study, about 20% of the families included children from a previous union or of one or both spouses. This can create some challenges when it comes to time to divide assets, which explains why almost a third are concerned about how their legacy will be managed. This is where it becomes crucially important to have had lots of conversation ahead of time and then sit down with a great estate planning lawyer to draw this out and make it perfectly clear for everybody what's going to happen and be in agreement on this. A typical scenario we see in our office is where a client has children from a first marriage that ended in a divorce, and then has additional children from a second marriage, or possibly even the new spouse is bringing in children from a previous marriage. So we may have a spouse who isn't related to some of the children in the family, and yet even with these challenges, 13% of people in blended families haven't shared their plans with their spouse. This is a serious problem. This will lead to horrendous complications, and these are items that need to be clearly discussed and agreed upon. About the same number don't know a fair way to divide their assets, and that is perfectly acceptable, because at least then you can begin to engage a financial planner, an estate planning lawyer, your spouse in the conversation about what is fair and equitable. Many don't know who the primary beneficiary should be. I sometimes have heard from estate planning lawyers that people come in to do their estate planning documents and ask the lawyers about giving to charity and ask them for recommendations. So we encourage people to think about these things ahead of time and begin to plan them out. They're not documents that are written in stone. When you're crafting your estate planning documents, these, the same as your financial plan, are documents which are kind of a snapshot in time. It is your intention at that moment, but life can change. So if life changes, redo the documents, make modifications to the documents. A financial plan is exactly the same way. We start with some assumptions. We take a snapshot in time and we say, if these assumptions turn out to be this way, that this is what it would look like. But there are a lot of assumptions in those things. Same thing with your estate planning documents, right? We start out, we're young, we think, oh, it's responsible to have a will and a power of attorney, or both powers of attorney. And then children come along and grandchildren come along. If we had a divorce and a remarriage, all of these things change our objectives and the documentation that support those objectives. So we don't want to leave those documents go untended to. They are not written in stone, and they need to be updated and reviewed on a regular basis, and we encourage everyone to do so. These are really tough decisions. The key is to make sure that you communicate clearly with your spouse and all of your children how you want your assets distributed. We help complicated, non-traditional families regularly, and if this is something that you're dealing with, we're happy to work with you. These next statistics are actually quite surprising to us. When I read this report and saw this number, I was quite shocked. Only 1 in 5, or 20% of affluent Canadians, have introduced their heirs to their financial advisor. This is a big missed opportunity, not only for planning your own wealth and transfer, but also for ensuring that your heirs have an advisor of their own to fill any gaps in their financial knowledge and to make sure that everyone's on the same page. The pandemic has been a facilitator of technology to be able to gather people together in ways that weren't easy to do previously. So we do have lots of circumstances where we have clients who have extended family in the US and Europe, spread out all across Canada. And how in the world do you put together a family meeting so that you can have a discussion around any of these things and make sure that everybody's on the same page? And of course, the technology that we're using to do this webcast is an easy facilitator of bringing people together, whether it's a Zoom meeting or Microsoft Teams or whatever it happens to be, where we can gather everybody together, so to speak, virtually, and have a discussion around these events. So this is the first thing on your to-do list for wealth transfer, is to make sure that your advisor and your heirs have met one another. Regardless of whether they have their own advisor or not, they need to be connected to this person, so for the continuity of the discussion, so that everybody's on the same page. Even if your family is scattered across the globe, it's critical that your advisor and your heirs know who's who and how to get in contact should something happen. Critically important. God forbid a sudden death or a serious illness, where all of a sudden some of these documents need to be dealt with. I don't like getting that call, of course, although I have had those calls. When it happens, my clients always tell me how grateful they are to have an independent third party who can take charge of the financial stuff. Maybe this was something that a spouse wasn't accustomed to dealing with. Usually financial things get divided up in households. Somebody manages, cash flow, is doing the bill paying. Somebody else is doing something else. It's rare to find that two people are always sitting down doing the same things together and duplicating that task. So if by chance something happens to one spouse, all of a sudden the other spouse is left to pick up those pieces. And that's where we come in to ensure that they have an adequate amount of understanding and education so that they can proceed. That's where we come in so that we can help them through that process. If I know the family and the finances, I can get back to work on a hassle-free transition while they focus on getting through the difficult emotional time. It's also important that your advisor has up-to-date contact information for your heirs and also for your executor. Key, especially if they're not the same people. We'll talk more about this relationship adding value later on. We understand that most families are meaning to talk about wealth transfer. They just may not have known how to address the subject, or just didn't feel that they found the right time to do so. We also know that a lot of them just don't do it. And the result can be conflict, oh, God forbid, litigation, and long-term arguing. This has the potential to divide family relationships, and of course, no one wants that to happen. Certainly, both money and death make us uncomfortable, and together they can be a difficult conversation indeed. As we saw a few minutes ago, there are those three big fears: how our heirs will handle the inheritance, concern about our children's spouses, and the worry that there's nothing for subsequent generations. So these could be other reasons Canadians are putting off these really important conversations. The problem with putting them off is that we may end up being forced to make big decisions when someone gets seriously ill or dies. And this is not an ideal time to be making any of those decisions. Decisions made under stress may cause long-term conflict. That's why it's important to seize the opportunity to make your decisions now while the stress is low and you can consider your options. I often liken this to when somebody is deciding on their funeral, what their funeral is going to look like. Because everybody has different objectives. I talked to funeral directors who said that, 30 years ago, 80% of Canadians were being buried and 20% were being cremated. In the last 30 years, those statistics have completely flipped, and 80% are being cremated and 20% are being buried. So obviously along the way somewhere, some of those decisions have been changed, and culturally things have changed. So when we're contemplating these types of decisions, we want to do them when we're not under pressure. We want to do them when our thinking is clear, we're well, and we have the ability to rationally think through that process so that we can decide what we feel works best for us, and also, if need be, have a conversation with the rest of the family so everybody's comfortable with that. So one of the things that we like to do with our clients is facilitate a family meeting, which, as I said earlier, now is much easier to do with the technology that we have available, to address fears and barriers and document the decisions that are made. I share this document with everyone involved and keep a copy so I can help when my clients need me. Financial advisors make great independent sounding boards for your big decisions, so I encourage you to involve them in this discussion. Making your decisions isn't quite the whole solution. You also need to make sure you identify and plan to overcome the 4 barriers. In my experience, there are 2 ways to address these barriers. First is to be very clear about the reasons behind the decisions that you've made. When your heirs understand the values and goals behind your wishes, they can make better decisions in response to economic and market conditions. The second is a good financial advisor who can fill in gaps in your heirs' knowledge. When we can help your heirs navigate the markets and do their own estate planning so the wealth continues to grow and move through generations. When you share your goals, values, and ideas with your heirs, you avoid potential conflicts because they don't have to guess about how you want the various parts of your estate managed, which brings us up to common problems with estates. It can take months or years to settle an estate after someone dies. In my experience, the thing that slows down even the best executor is all the time it takes to track down documents and information they need to settle the estate. This is why I recommend doing an estate directory. This is not a will. This is not a power of attorney. This is a document that helps to explain things like basic personal information, such as social insurance number, marriage history. This is also where you will list all of the estate's assets, such as investments, real estate, or valuable objects. If you've talked to Tony recently, you'll know what valuable objects mean and how that fits into an estate settlement now under new rules. We would also make sure we include any liabilities as well, such as mortgages, outstanding loans. This document will have the contact information for your lawyer, your accountant, insurance broker, and other advisors. It will also detail where all of your documentation can be found. For example, your will, investment records, insurance policies, and so on. We do these documents regularly, and I'm happy to help you get your estate directory in order. Taking a bit of time now to put all this information in one place sets up your executor to get things settled and your wealth transferred to your heirs. Obviously, we think it's prudent for people to share this information with their executor, and we would encourage you to do so. This document is not dissimilar from your financial plan or some of your estate planning documents in so much as it is a snapshot in time, and that things will change as time goes by. Often we end up talking with our, I want to call them senior clients, but I also realize I'm quickly fitting into that category. So when we're talking to our senior clients, a lot of times we're getting questions on how can we consolidate things? How can we make this simpler, right? When it comes to the estate settlement process, we don't want to burden our executor or our heirs with a daunting process where things are spread out far and wide. We want to make this as simple as possible. So we do work with our clients to try to accomplish that goal as much as possible ahead of time. Completing an estate directory is an ongoing process. So we do encourage people to review those from time to time, make appropriate changes, and then file a new copy with their executor and with their financial advisor. Speaking of your executors, it's important to make sure that they're in the loop as well. Your estate directory is a great start and will help them work through your estate's details. But just like your heirs, they also need to fully understand your intentions and wishes. In our office, we work very closely with our clients' executors to educate them about how to honor these wishes. Make sure you introduce your executors to your financial advisor so that they know who to call for support as they work to ensure your wealth is transferred quickly and properly to your heirs. This takes us to the final step, which focuses on those heirs. Sharing your values and intentions and wishes is very important. Equally critical is making sure your heirs are fully prepared to take over and take care of your wealth. Talk to them about your approach to financial planning, budgeting, tax minimization, or how you want your business managed after you pass away. I like to meet with multiple generations in my clients' families to make sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to understanding the strategy and planning for the ongoing management of their wealth. I find that when we do this early and update things regularly, the family isn't trying to make critical decisions during a time of stress and worry, and heirs have the opportunity to keep your wealth growing. Whether you are a blended family or not, these 6 steps are key to making sure your wealth transfer goes smoothly and reflects your wishes and values. Introduce your family to your financial advisor and create a multi-generation view of your financial plans. Make good decisions when the pressure is off, not when the pressure is on. Clearly explain the rationale for your decisions to help avoid family conflict later. It's all about love. It's not about money. Make an estate directory so your executor can find everything that they need. Make sure your executors are included in your planning so that they can ensure your wealth is transferred quickly, properly, and tax efficiently. And lastly, educate your heirs so that they know how to manage your wealth for future generations, which is clearly your intention. This research and my own experience show that when we are having open conversations about money and being clear about our values and intentions, we can preserve wealth, avoid conflict, honor our parents' wishes. The 6 steps we've reviewed today are a simple place to start, and a financial advisor like myself or Mike can help you get this going. Most people I talk to about these 6 steps understand the value of planning and discussion, But the research shows that having these honest discussions is more easily said than done, and that's where I can help. I find that when a neutral third party like myself facilitates these family meetings, we can get past some of the fear and anxiety around inheritances. I'm trained to help you and your heirs, and even their heirs, to sit down and have a frank conversation about how you want your wealth to be managed after you pass away. I can make sure the conversation is documented and the decisions are on file so your heirs and executors can act in accordance with your wishes. I can also help pull together that estate kit and make sure it stays up to date. When the time comes, I will work with your executor and your heirs to help settle your estate quickly and to provide continuity on how your portfolio is managed. Our office is always available to educate and support your heirs so that your wealth continues to enrich your family for generations to come. Whenever the topic of money comes up in families, it has the potential to be intimidating. We want to try and take some of the intimidation out of that. We want to facilitate ways to open up that conversation within your families because your objectives are good. And everybody needs to understand that and be on the same page. So if this is something that we can help you with, we're glad to do that.